Welcome back, girls, guys, and gremlins. This is part 2 of ranking all of the books that I've read so far in 2026. I did do math wrong. I said 54 books have been read so far. It's actually 50. As I was prepping the books for this video, I realized that on my spreadsheet that I used to track all the books that I've read, some of them had been duplicated. So it's 50, not 54. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into our fantasy books. We are going to start off with Vengeance Has No Sound by Braca Smith, and I got this one as an ARC. The barriers around Nick's area are failing, and monsters are starting to get into its cities. Novulus has been chosen to be on a specialist team to try and restore the peace. He is an outcast for 2 reasons. He's deaf, and he can't wield Vitapars, the building blocks for everything in this world. Before he rides out with a team that doesn't want him, he starts to have a surprise effect on the magical beings he works with. Soon after, he makes friends with a creature that is thought to be extinct. On his journey, he uncovers things that were buried centuries ago and has to make many hard decisions. This was one of the first books I read this year, and it set the bar so high for everything following it. The world building was top notch and the magic system was super unique. I would put this on the level of the 5th season series by N.K. Jesmond, so if you enjoyed that, you will love this. I started recommending this book to people before I even finished it. I think around the 25% mark, I was already texting people and was like, you need to have this on your radar. I'm keeping a close eye on all of Braca's social media, just so then I know when the next book comes out, so then I can reread this one and hit the ground running with that second book. So, no surprise, it's a 5-star book. Next up is The Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. This is about halfway through the Percy Jackson series. Freshman year for Percy starts off rockier than he expected when the cheerleaders at his new school turn out to be demons. And even Camp Half-Blood isn't safe for the demigods as Kronos continues to move against them and the gods as a whole. Percy and his friends have to venture into the labyrinth to try and stop an invasion on the camp that they all love. This book made the stakes for the whole series actually feel real, and I think this is collectively where all of the characters and myself kind of had an oh shit moment. I also love a good maze, especially when the things inside of it are really cool. This book didn't have anything too crazy, but it was probably one of my favorites in the series, so we're gonna put it at a solid 4. Next up is The Last Olympian, which is the end of the Percy Jackson versus Kronos saga. This is where all of the previous books kind of come together and it ends in that head-to-head battle in Manhattan. We follow Camp Half-Blood as they're fighting against the Titans and their armies for the fate of the gods and the world. I think this book handled the weight of events that happened in it really well, considering that it is a YA targeted around like junior high, high school, maybe even middle school. It didn't shy away from the fact that there were children dying and there was an actual war going on without being too detailed. There were a lot of things that just kind of magically worked themselves out or worked out for Percy and his side, which was a little bit like, okay, taking the chosen one a little too far, but again, it is a YA book. The twists were also pretty obvious. There was a spy subplot that you're like, yeah, okay, I know who it is before like there's this big reveal. I picked up this series because I didn't get a chance to read it when it came out when I was in middle school, so I didn't have high expectations, but for what it was, I think it did pretty good. And I put it at a 4-star with Battle of the Labyrinth. The last Rick Riordan book that we're going to look at today is Percy Jackson and the Chalice of the Gods. And this is the start of the senior year kind of mini saga. Percy is hoping to go to New Rome University with Annabeth next year. He's currently attending alternative high school in hopes of graduating on time despite all of the clusterfucks that he's been put through during his high school career. And his father breaks the news that his admission comes with a couple extra hoops that he has to jump through because his dad is who he is. In order to gain admission, he has to obtain 3 recommendation letters from Mount Olympus by doing quests, and his first quest comes from Ganymede, the cupbearer to Zeus. His chalice has gone missing, and it's really important for it not to fall into wrong hands because if a mortal drinks it, they turn into a god. So Percy, Grover, and Annabeth are kind of thrown back into the thick of things as they try to retrieve the chalice before anyone notices it's gone. In a similar vein as the main Percy Jackson series, I kind of just pick this up whenever I need an easy palate cleanser. It wasn't anything too crazy intense. It did what it needed to, so it's a pretty mid 3 stars. Next, we have Tress by Brandon Sanderson. Tress is an average girl on an island in an emerald green ocean. Her favorite pastimes are collecting cups brought to her by sailors from all over and listening to stories told to her by her friend Charlie. Everything changes when Charlie is sent off the island in search for a bride and gets into major trouble while he's away. Tress has to sneak off the island and stow away on a ship in hopes of rescuing her friend, who she also happens to be in love with. Along the way, she makes some unexpected friends to help her battle the Sorceress of the Midnight Sea. This was my first Brandon Sanderson book, and I kind of picked it up to see if I liked his writing style. I didn't know much about it or him, except for the fact that he just churns out large books like it's nothing. I really liked the idea of oceans being made up of deadly spores and having unique characteristics based on their color. And in the book description, it was mentioned that The Princess Bride was a big inspiration, and it really showed. There's a lot of that lighthearted banter that you see in the movie in that book, as well as weird characters that you love and you love to hate. It was a good book, nothing too mind-blowing, but the world building was great, the characters were amazing, solid 4 stars. Our next book is Sing the Dark to Sleep by Micah Hauser. Kira lives in an enchanted tower from which she sings inspiration into the city of Pearl. She may help the entire community that surrounds her, but the only one that knows about her existence is the Chancellor. After a bold explorer discovers her, Kira decides to break out and explore the town she has been helping in secret for most of her life. While she is out discovering new things and making new friends, she learns about a magical rage that is infecting the people throughout the town that she has grown to love. Racing against a timeline given to her by the Chancellor himself, Kira and her new friends must stop the madness or risk Kira being confined to her tower for the rest of her life. I was given an arc of this book by Micah, and I loved it. It is a perfect combination of Tangled and K-pop Demon Hunters. Kira very much reads like a Rapunzel, and she uses her magic to interact with the world around her and fight the bad guys like the Huntrix did. Even with this big looming thread and timeline, it's a really cozy found family book. I also love the fact that queerness and disabilities were so normal in this world. If you only look at the main group of characters, we had a character that was asexual, a disabled lesbian, a trans man, and someone with major anxiety. All of that was mentioned, and if it needed to be delved into for the story, it did. Other than that, it was like, yeah, this is who I am, and they moved on. And it was a really refreshing take on queerness and disability and community, and everyone supported each other and in the way that they needed, and it worked really, really well. I gave it a 4.5 stars, and I highly recommend. Next up is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is a mouthful to say, and that is written by Sangu Mandana. I'm hoping I said that right. Our main character has a really cool name, Mika Moon. I just loved that, and it was such a vibe through the entire book. Mika is a witch that keeps her magic hidden in fear of drawing too much attention to herself in the witching community at large. When she decides to make an online account pretending to be a witch, she draws the eyes of the staff at the Nowhere House. She cautiously takes on the role of being a magic tutor to 3 young witches and quickly realizes that it's not going to be as easy as she expected. Her co-workers, who are a retired actor, 2 caretakers, and an annoyingly handsome librarian, try to help her teach the children as much as possible before a lawyer comes in to investigate the goings-on at Nowhere House. Mika has to decide if she's willing to go against all the rules that she's stuck to her entire life to save her new home and everyone that lives there. I love me a found family trope, and this is probably one of the best examples of that. It was pretty predictable and formulaic as far as a cozy fantasy goes, but I didn't really care because it was done so well. I listened to the audiobook for this, and the narrator knocked it out of the park, and her accents were amazing. It wasn't anything too groundbreaking, but it really hit the spot for cozy fantasy, so I gave it a 3.5 stars. This Dark Descent by Kaylin Josephson is up next. Makira Russell is forced to enter the Illinier in order to save her father and their horse breeding farm. The Illinier is a once-in-a-decade horse race known for its large prize and even larger body count. She must team up with a rogue enchantress, an ambitious noble, and his standoff friend in order to best her dangerous enemies. By the end of the 3-round competition, Makira discovers that more than she thought may be on the line. The setup to this was so long that I almost DNF'd it. It really leans into the politics of what's going on, and that wasn't exactly what I expected when it was kind of pitched to me as a deadly magical horse race. I will say all of the horse side of this was done really well, and that's coming from someone who worked in the horse industry for a decent amount of time. I'm not sure if I'm gonna pick up with this series going forward, but I might if I feel like gambling on a book. It was a decent book, loved the premise. I give it a 3.5 stars. The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashim is up next. The Jasad Kingdom has been ash for 10 years and its magic has been outlawed. The kingdom's enemies thought that they killed all the royal family, but one unknowingly slipped through their fingers. Every day, Sylvia has to be on guard and hope her heritage and magic go undiscovered. After a moment of anger, Aaron, the heir of Nizal, has his sights set on her. In order to save her life, she must team up with the very man who is hunting down rebels from her long-dead country. In order to keep her enemies happy, Sylvia enters a deadly competition as Aaron's champion. As she trains and competes, her relationship with Aaron changes and her scorched kingdom starts to rise from the ashes. Sylvia is faced with a choice between her people and her heart, and her decision may change the course of history forever. The vibes of this book were really similar to This Dark Descent. The setup was a little bit longer and denser than I would have liked, but it did move on faster than Dark Descent did. There was a little bit of jumping around in the timeline that was hard to track, but it didn't happen enough to really take away from the main plot. This was also an amazing enemies to lovers, and I just ate it up. The characters and the world building had great depth, and I'm so excited to get my hands on the next one. I gave this one 4 stars. Our next book is The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. The emperor is dying and has named his violent second son as his heir. This new heir requires concubines, and Wei Yin sees this as an opportunity to help her struggling family and village. She hopes to remain mainly under the radar and be able to persuade the prince to send back aid to her home. Any more attention in that could put her on the receiving end of a gruesome death at the hand of any number of people. She gains more attention and a higher status than she hoped, and Wei has to not only survive, but help decide the fate of her entire nation. If you liked the politics of Apothecary Diaries or Heavenly Tyrant, you're gonna eat this book up. I really liked the idea and most of the plot, but the politics were a little bit too slow for me at points. Beside those lulls, this was a fantastic book. It was beautifully written, and you can tell that a lot of thought and effort went into it. The ending had me tearing up and gasping because I was so into it by the end. The magic system was really interesting and a cool take on royal families having a sort of tangible difference from everyone else. 10 toes down on my 4.5 stars. Highly recommend. Camilla Cole's Arcane Inheritance is our next book. Ellery Morgan is set on proving that she deserves to be at Warren University. Warren is an Ivy League school with rumored ties to the occult and magic. Even though she's in the midst of her freshman year, she feels like campus is a little bit more familiar than it should be. She turns to legacy student Hudson Graves in hopes of figuring out what exactly is going on around Warren. She slowly discovers that the university is hiding more than just systemic racism and classist societies. Everything Ellery is and has been is on the line, and she hopes she can get to the bottom of it before it's too late. I will admit that the last hour or so broke my brain and lost me. And after I finished it, I just kind of had to sit in silence to mentally recover from everything that happened. I did really love the mechanics of magic in this book and how using it came at a cost. Institutions using BIPOC students and faculty members is a major problem, and it is talked about really well in this book. Ellery is so much stronger and smarter than I could ever hope, and I loved living through her, especially towards the end when she got to stick it to the pricks in her life. This book is one that I may reread just to give myself another chance to fully process that ending, and I highly recommend it to anyone who loves dark academia, especially with a little bit of fantasy in there. I loved it. 4 stars, no notes. Up next is The Blood of Blackthorn by Rocio Carnanza. Eve's life is slowly becoming haunted with her past. She is a lady in the Givenshmere court, a land that has outlawed magic and witches. She thought she was in for a comfortable life because she didn't inherit any magic from her mother, the enchantress to the last king. That all goes out the window when her friend and love interest is married off to a political ally, and the princess is murdered on the day of their wedding. Things get even trickier when people see the princess's assassin, and it just so happens to be Eve's long-lost sister. People start to question if Eve is on their side or on the side of their enemy, the Blackthorn, that is a land of witches. There are eyes of the enemy everywhere, and Eve hopes that they don't notice that a mysterious grimoire has appeared to her, or that she may be a little bit more magical than she thought. This is the first of a trilogy. I got an arc of the third book in this trilogy as well as the first two, just so that I knew what was going on. And I highly recommend this dark, gritty fantasy. There are a lot of point of views in the book, and at the beginning it made it a bit hard to keep track of who was who. I did like the fact that we got both Eve and her sister Clarissa's point of view, as they are on opposing sides. Some of the other characters I didn't feel were as important, and I would have rather their chapters be allotted to Eve or Clarissa, but towards the end it kind of became clear as to why we were getting so many different viewpoints. The formatting got a little bit weird with long dialogue back and forths, and it was hard to keep track of, but that could have been a Kindle issue. It did get better in the later books, so it wasn't that big of a deal. The world building was really well done. When you open the book, you're presented a gorgeous map, and there's an appendix at the end explaining all of the different houses and covens, which was a really good touch. There was also artwork sprinkled throughout, and that was such a fun surprise. This was a really good book. I enjoyed it both as its own thing and as a trilogy as a whole. And I gave this one a 3.5 stars. And the trilogy just kept getting better with each book. We have one historical fiction, and it is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. Florida in the Jim Crow era wasn't a safe place for people of color, and the Gracetown School for Boys was even more dangerous. Robbie, who is just 12 years old, must survive the 6-month sentence he was given for hitting a white boy in the defense of his older sister Gloria. The school has a reputation for boys going missing while serving their sentences at the Reformatory. Taints aren't uncommon, especially to boys like Robbie, who has a talent for seeing them. He must learn the rules of living at the Reformatory from his friends Redbone and Blue if he has any chance of making it out alive. We also follow Gloria as she is trying to help her brother from outside through their community and the broken system that sent him to the Reformatory in the first place. This was such a beautiful and heartbreaking story. Everything was so perfectly executed that you could have just slapped a nonfiction sticker on it and I would have believed it. Knowing that the author pulled from her own family history made this so much worse, and my heart actually sank into my butt. I knew horrors like these stories happened, but the author's note at the end just added another level of heaviness to this book. Some places tag it as horror, and I think that also tracks just for the weight that this book has. If you liked a book called Junie and you can handle a bit of a heavier story, I highly recommend this one. If you liked this one and wanted a similar book, I highly recommend Junie. It isn't as heavy as The Reformatory, but it still deals with the similar topics and gives it the correct weight. I also gave this one 5 stars, and I may actually reread it. We're now into literature, and we're going to start with The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. Barbara Van Laar goes missing while at summer camp. Her disappearance means a little bit more than the average camper would, because her family owns the summer camp and employs most of the town. She also isn't the first child from her family to go missing. Her brother named Bear went missing 14 years ago and was never found. While trying to find Barbara, we learn more about her family, and the secrets hidden in her dynasty's past. Personally, I feel like this book tried to do way too much. The pacing didn't match the scope of the plot, and I'm not sure if it's because it's a literature fiction book trying to be a mystery, or a mystery trying to be a literature book. There were way too many point of views for what it was, and then we had jumping around on the timeline within all of those point of views, and it made it so much harder than it needed to be to follow. Not only are we following Barbara's timeline, we're also following Bear's timeline, and we're also following the investigator's timeline. And to make matters even weirder, we're following a random serial killer's timeline. The serial killer we could have gotten rid of fully and it would not have changed anything, other than him being brought up as a kidnapping suspect. The investigator's subplot is her figuring out that she wants to be independent, and it didn't really do much for the actual story, and I just didn't care. I think the actual missing child story got maybe 60% of the book, and for it being a book that the summary really focuses on the missing children, that feels kind of weird. If it really only focused on Barbara and Bear, it could have been so much better and a lot more streamlined. The timelines jumps wouldn't have been as confusing, and the handfuls of point of views wouldn't have been too hard to track. There was also a lot of plot twists at the end, but none of them felt really earned because the setup wasn't given the time that it needed. Too much was going on in parts that didn't need it, and the parts that could have used it didn't get the time that they needed. I gave it a very generous 3 stars. It just didn't do what it wanted to. Jeanette McCurdy's Half His Age is up next, and I have very strong opinions about this book. It kind of left a sour taste in my mouth, and I don't really want to do a full summary and thoughts. I was really hoping this was going to be a cautionary tale against a really big problem that is grooming and pedophilia, and I just feel like we didn't get that. This is a really polarizing book, and you either thought it did a really great job or a really bad job, and unfortunately I'm in the really bad job camp. It was an icky story, but not for the reasons that I wanted it to be. I gave it a 2.5 stars, and I feel like that was even too high. I would not recommend this book to anyone, so we're just gonna move on. Next is Butter by Asako Yuzuki. Rika works in a newsroom full of men and rarely makes a dish more complicated than ramen. So when she starts interviewing gourmet cook Manako Kaji, who was imprisoned for several murders, their talks feel more like a class about food than talks about the murders. In hopes of getting the major story that she wants from Kaji, Rika goes on a food journey like no other. As she learns more about cooking and her deadly cooking correspondent, Rika explores the areas of misogyny, obsession, romance, as well as the pleasures that Japan's foods can give. This was a really interesting look at what food can mean to different people, but not much stuck out to me other than how hungry this book made me. I gave it a solid 3 stars. It was a cool book. I liked the takes that it had, but it wasn't anything too crazy. We have one nonfiction book, and it is When Trees Testify by Rhonda L. Montgomery. Through data and stories, Montgomery shows us how intertwined the fields of botany and history of Black Americans are, as well as exploring how plants interact with her and her family's history. It was super informative, and I had no clue about pretty much anything in this book. I loved the mix of stories and data that we were given throughout the whole thing, and I highly recommend to anyone. 4 stars, highly recommend. We're now in our last category of romance, and we're going to start with For Whom the Bell Tolls by J.C. Lynn. Lily finds herself waking up in a version of the afterlife that is wilder than she could ever imagine. After exploring many of its areas, she finds herself drawn to actual hell. She opens up a desk to help Hell's more stubborn arrivals and starts making friends with many of her demon co-workers. Due to some meddling from actual Lucifer, Lily crosses paths with Bell, who captivates her attention with his deep, attractive voice. As Lily figures out what she wants from her time after death, she finds herself at trivia nights with gods, adopting a shark-loving child, and falling in love with the Prince of Hell. Her comfortable afterlife is threatened when something tries to destroy everything and everyone she holds dear. Lily must fight like hell to keep it safe so that there is something left to live in if she decides to stick around. I rarely cry while reading books, and this one had me bawling several times. It had an amazing range of vibes, and every single one just knocked it out of the park. The spicy scenes were really good and showed just how great the connection between Lily and Belle is. And there's also fantastic examples of familial and platonic love. The men in this book also had such refreshing shows of masculinity, and they were not afraid to check each other when they were assholes. I would ride or die for Sharky, even if they didn't ask. The found family trope really is one of my favorites, and this one did it perfectly. I already knew a little bit about this universe from JC's TikTok series, but I haven't been keeping up with it. It wasn't detrimental to the story at all, though I did have to actively stop picturing her in all of her costumes as the various characters. If you pick up this book and you have any kind of parental problems, please have tissues nearby. I will absolutely be picking up this book as often as I can in the future. And it was 5 stars. And if I could give it more, I probably would. And that goes for all of my 5-star picks. If there were 90 stars I could give them, I would. If You Could Be Mine by Sarah Frazan is our next book. Iran can be a dangerous place for women, especially if they're romantically in love with one another. This book follows Sahar as she is navigating her love for her best friend since childhood, Nasir, and grappling with the fact that the love of her life was just promised to a doctor. Nasir is fine with continuing their secret love after she's married, but Sahar wants her all to herself, even in public. Iran may be against homosexuality, but isn't against a woman transitioning into a man. So Sahar is faced with the choice between either giving up the body she loves or the woman that she loves. I was never fully sold on the love between Sahar and Nasir, and towards the end, I really did wish that she cut all of her ties with him. I do understand Sahar not wanting to do so, and I had to keep reminding herself that these are actual teenagers, especially when anyone was doing something illogical. This was a super interesting look at what the queer community goes through in cultures like Iran. I think this story makes a great argument for intersectionality within the LGBTQ community. The underlying struggle of sexuality versus gender was something really interesting, and I'm glad that it didn't shy away from the darker side of that. I didn't really care for anyone in this book, and I think that was a little bit detrimental to the story, but overall I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3-star. It was nice, but nothing I really have thought about since finishing it. The next book is A Deep End by V. Ellie Hazelwood. Scarlett is focused on 2 things: getting into med school and coming back to platform diving after a serious injury. She doesn't have time for anything else. Lucas is an Olympic medal swimmer who secretly broke up with his longtime girlfriend, who happens to be Scarlett's teammate. They have nothing in common except for wanting to get a little kinky in the bedroom. Things heat up in more ways than one as they both try to juggle college, sports, and maybe a some strings attached relationship. For as kinky as this book is, I was blushing like I never have before. The only thing that took away from the book is the miscommunication or lack of communications surrounding emotions when it comes to our 2 main characters. I get telling your friend that you've fallen for their ex isn't great, but they harp on wanting good communication between the 2 of them but never actually follow through. Does it make them feel a little bit more realistic? Yes, but the miscommunication trope is one of my pet peeves, so it was something that I just kind of had to get over. I will say this is probably one of the better book relationships in terms of chemistry, and I loved the use of therapy throughout the entire thing. The voice acting was top tier and really helped make everything come alive. It would have been a 5-star if there wasn't that miscommunication, just because, again, it's one of my pet peeves, but I still really loved it. Gave it a 4-star. Next up is Game Changers by Rachel Reed. Scott is a creature of habit, especially when it comes to his hockey career. So when a smoothie helps him break a bad streak on the ice, he comes back for more. It also helps that he has a thing for the cute barista Kip. They end up in a steamy secret relationship and things are looking great, except when it comes to going public. Hockey isn't the most welcoming when it comes to queerness and often uses it as an insult on the ice. Kip and Scott must decide what they are willing to hide and share in their relationship, especially as the playoffs are fast approaching and Scott is finding himself in the spotlight more and more often. This was my first spicy romance, and I'm not quite sold on it, and I don't know if it's my cup of tea. While the timeline of events in this book is totally believable, the plot didn't do it justice. There's a tag online of porn with plot, and that very much is what this is. I think scenes in the bedroom got more attention than literally anything else in this book, which if that's what you want, go for it. I love that for you. It's not my cup of tea, and it just made everything feel very surface level and the connection between Kip and Scott never felt more than just them being horny. I also hated Kip's voice in the audiobook. Like, I get narration and voices is really tough, but it sounded like the guy got punched in the face whenever he tried to do Kip's voice. And I could not tell that he was supposed to be from Boston until he mentioned it. So if you are going to pick this one up, I would recommend getting a physical copy instead of the audiobook. It wasn't my thing, but it wasn't terrible, so I gave it a 3. Our next book is A Soul to Keep by Opal Ryan. Orpheus is a desk walker that just wants someone to live with in his home at the Vale. So he struck a deal with the humans that he will give them a warding charm every 10 years in exchange for one of its residents. Rhea is known around her village as the harbinger of bad omens. Her family was killed by demons when she was just a child, and for some reason they spared her. When she is given the choice between being a sacrificial bride to a duskwalker or living the rest of her life in an underground cell, she chooses to leave everything she knows behind and leave with a creature that she is sure will kill her. When they meet, Rhea is determined not to show her fear, and she takes Orpheus by surprise. She just wants to survive for as long as she can while he tries his best to help her thrive by his side. I didn't expect a monster romance to tug at my heartstrings so much. I love how we got to see both of our main characters slowly fall in love and realize that they found their match. I got so into their relationship that I actually got upset when Rhea was kidnapped towards the end, and I'm so glad that they got the happy ending and it fit them so well. There are times that I wanted to scream at Rhea because she was being stupid or immature, but also her reactions were really realistic, so I can't be too mad about it. Orpheus is literally the definition of tough guy except for her, and it was a really nice surprise. And I think he might be in the running for one of my favorite love interests. I highly recommend the audiobook for this because Orpheus's voice was amazing and it really helped him seem like the larger than life monster that he is. I gave this book a 4-star. Our last 2 books are by Bryn Weaver. We're going to start with Butcher and Blackbird. 2 serial killers set their sights on the same target. After dealing with him, they decide to have a yearly competition that is a race to off another killer. Over their shared love of killing others, their friendship becomes something more and their methods reach a new level of deadly. Highly recommend the audiobook for this one as well. The dual narration and the accent just really took this to a new level and made it the amazing book that it is. The chemistry between our 2 main characters made so much sense. They were clearly made for each other, but it is still a relationship that they have to work on, which was really nice. They're also funny as fuck. The plot and character development was perfect, as well as the pacing. I ate this up in one day, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the next series. Do make sure you read the content warnings for this one. There's a lot, and you'll either see it as a big warning sign or as a little sneak peek as to what's to come. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 stars. Our last book is Tourist Season. Nolan came to Cape Carnage seeking revenge on the woman who killed his brother and fractured his life forever after a fatal hit and run. However, Harper isn't the woman he expected. A temporary truce to get rid of a shared enemy becomes more, and his need for revenge comes into question. Nolan and Harper are faced with the question if they could become more than a fling or if they're just too broken. This is another one that I strongly recommend reading the content warnings for, but mostly for the dementia and aging persons warnings. The rest are pretty average for a murder book. I really liked the mild enemies to lovers progression we got. The tie into Butcher and Blackbird was also brilliant, and I loved that little detail. This one didn't hit quite as hard as Butcher and Blackbird did, and it kind of followed the same formulaic flow, but I still had a really good time with it. Our last book got 4 stars, and that is all 50 books that I read in January and February. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and a comment. My next long form video is hopefully coming out sometime in May. In between now and then, if you want more bookish content from me, check me out on TikTok and Instagram. And until I see you here again, I hope you find an amazing book to curl up with. Dude.